The small town of Ashford had always been a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Its tree-lined streets, quiet neighborhood parks, and old brick buildings painted a picturesque image of serenity. But underneath its surface, something darker had always lurked. It wasn't the kind of place where a lot of excitement happened, nothing that would ever make the evening news. For years, Ashford was a town content in its peace, with only the occasional whisper of trouble. Maya Harris grew up in Ashford, a place where everyone's past was as well known as their present. Her family was no exception. Her mother, a strong-willed woman who worked as a nurse at the local hospital, had raised Maya to be tough, to never back down from a fight, and to always stand her ground. Her father, James Harris, had been a simple man, a hard-working mechanic who kept his head down and worked for his family. He'd been a constant presence in Maya's life until he was wrongfully imprisoned when she was just 11 years old. The charges? A crime he never committed. The truth? No one seemed to care. Maya had always been told that her father was guilty, that the trial was fair, and that everything had been handled the way it should be. But deep down, she had never truly believed it. She was young when it happened, and the years had passed with her only carrying the vague memory of the man she called her father. She had heard the rumors, whispers about how corrupt the local police were, about how the town had always been divided along racial lines, but as a child, she had never questioned it. James had been sentenced to life in prison, and for years, Maya and her mother had struggled with the weight of his absence. Maya had grown up with the absence of her father being a constant ache in her heart, while her mother carried the burden of his loss in her own quiet way. They had moved forward, but there was always something that felt missing. Maya focused on her studies, and found a sense of purpose working part-time at the diner after school. She learned to be independent, but there was always the nagging thought in the back of her mind. Was her father really guilty? Life had settled into a routine, but when Maya turned 25, things began to change. One day, while rummaging through old boxes in the attic, she found something that she had never seen before, an old, faded newspaper clipping from the day her father had been arrested. The headline screamed of a brutal crime, but as Maya skimmed through the article, something caught her eye. There was a statement in the report from Chief Walker, the same police officer who had led the investigation into her father's case. It was a throwaway line, a small detail, but something about it felt off. This small detail set something in motion within Maya. She couldn't shake the feeling that something about her father's case didn't add up. She needed to know the truth, not just for herself, but for her father. Maya spent the next few days obsessively searching for anything that might explain why her father had been locked away all those years ago. She found the old court documents, her mother's notes from the trial, and even some letters from her father written during his time in prison. Each one felt like a piece of the puzzle, but nothing clicked. Finally, one afternoon, she found herself sitting in her mother's living room, holding the crumpled newspaper clipping in her hand. The questions had been building inside her for years, but now they were demanding answers. She had always been hesitant to confront her mother about the past, but now she couldn't hold back. "Mama, I need to talk to you about Daddy," Maya said, her voice trembling slightly as she approached the subject. Her mother, as always, remained calm, though there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. She had been through enough with the case, and she had always avoided discussing it. But Maya couldn't let it go. "Why didn't you ever tell me about this?" Maya asked, holding up the article. "There's something in this story that doesn't add up. This doesn't sound right. Why did you let them tell me he was guilty?" Her mother sighed, her face falling into a mixture of exhaustion and regret. "Maya, I did what I thought was best. You were so young. Your father, he was a good man, but sometimes good men make bad decisions. I didn't want to burden you with the truth. I didn't want you to hate him. But Mama, How could I hate him if I don't even know the truth? Maya replied, her voice rising. What if they lied? What if everything was a mistake? Her mother's eyes welled up with tears, and for the first time, Maya saw her mother truly vulnerable. I didn't want you to suffer the way I have, she whispered. You think I haven't thought about what happened every single day? I've carried that guilt for years. I didn't want you to have to carry it, too. Maya stared at her mother, her heart heavy. This was the truth Maya had been avoiding for so long. It wasn't just the injustice of the case that hurt. It was the way her mother had kept her in the dark. She felt a mix of anger and sadness, but most of all, she felt a burning need to uncover the full truth. Then we need to go back, Maya said, her voice steady. We need to find out what really happened. And I'm not doing this alone. Her mother's eyes widened, a silent plea to stop, but Maya was resolute. She had made up her mind. The secrets of Ashford, of her family, and of her father's life were buried somewhere, and she was going to unearth them, no matter the cost. Maya's investigation into her father's case wasn't easy. She began by contacting the lawyer who had represented James during his trial, but the lawyer refused to speak to her, claiming he had long since retired and had no interest in reopening old wounds. She then turned to old friends of her father, but most of them had moved on with their lives or were too afraid to speak out. But one person remembered. Rachel, a former journalist who had written for the local paper at the time of James' arrest, reached out to Maya after she made a bold decision to contact her. Rachel had always suspected that something wasn't right about the case. She had been a young reporter at the time and had written a few pieces on James' trial. Rachel revealed that she had been digging into the case for years, but had never been able to find concrete evidence of corruption until now. Together, they began to piece together the truth, slowly uncovering evidence that pointed to a deeper conspiracy involving Chief Walker, the town's police department, and powerful figures within Ashford. The more they uncovered, the more Maya realized that her father had been set up. Flashbacks to the past, triggered by Maya's conversations with Rachel, revealed that James had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had been accused of a crime he had not committed, but there were other people involved, people who had used his race against him, people who wanted to make sure he stayed locked away. As Maya dug deeper, the town's hostility grew. Anonymous threats were left on her doorstep, and her car was vandalized. The whispers that had once been rumors were now becoming a frightening reality. Yet Maya couldn't stop. She couldn't let the memory of her father's face, the one she hadn't seen in years, fade away without doing something. Through the investigation, Maya uncovered disturbing information about how Chief Walker had manipulated the evidence against her father and had covered up the involvement of other key suspects. Her father wasn't the only one who had been a victim. There were others in Ashford who had faced the same injustice. The more Maya uncovered, the more the town's silence seemed deafening. But despite the mounting threats and the danger she faced, Maya found an unexpected ally in Rachel. Together, they made plans to confront Chief Walker, determined to expose the truth no matter the cost. Maya could feel the weight of history bearing down on her as the investigation neared its climax. She was no longer just fighting for her father's freedom. She was fighting for the future of Ashford, for the truth that had been buried for far too long. The confrontation with Chief Walker had been brewing for weeks. Maya could feel the pressure mounting as the town's silence grew louder, suffocating her every step. Rachel had gathered all the evidence they could, testimonies from witnesses who had been too afraid to speak out before, copies of old police reports, and, most crucially, the startling revelation that Chief Walker had intentionally withheld crucial evidence during her father's trial. Maya had all the pieces, and now it was time to confront the man who had destroyed her father's life. On the day of the confrontation, the air in Ashford felt thick, heavy with tension. Maya and Rachel arranged a meeting with Chief Walker at his office, a large, imposing building that loomed over the small town like a symbol of the law's unquestionable authority. Maya walked in with determination in her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't just facing the man who had ruined her father's life. She was staring down decades of corruption and racial injustice that had festered in the shadows of Ashford for far too long. The door to Walker's office creaked open as Maya stepped inside, her gaze locking onto the police chief sitting behind his polished wooden desk. His cold eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, a flicker of recognition passed across his face. He knew who she was, knew why she was here. But he didn't speak. "Maya Harris," Chief Walker said finally, his voice flat, without emotion. "I assume you're here to accuse me of something, just like everyone else." Maya's blood boiled at the dismissive tone in his voice, but she held her ground. She wasn't here to argue. She was here to expose him. "No," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here to show you the truth." She placed a stack of papers on his desk, documents, photos, court records, all evidence of his corruption. She had spent weeks gathering it, sifting through the lies and deceit to find the undeniable facts. She knew what was coming would shake this town to its core, but it was the only way to set things right. Walker's eyes darted to the papers, and his expression flickered for just a moment. Maya could see the fear in his eyes. For the first time in years, the man who had once controlled everything in Ashford seemed vulnerable. But he quickly masked it, leaning back in his chair with an air of false confidence. "This is nonsense," he said, his voice rising with frustration. "These are just your accusations, your opinions. None of this proves anything." Maya leaned forward, her voice firm. "It proves everything. You manipulated evidence to convict my father. You knew he was innocent, and you buried the truth. And you did it because you thought no one would ever challenge you." Rachel stood beside Maya, her hand resting lightly on her shoulder, a silent support as they faced down the chief. The weight of the years, of the injustice done to their families, hung heavily in the room. Chief Walker stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He slammed his fist onto the desk, his face flushed with anger. "You don't know what you're dealing with, girl," he spat. "You have no idea what this town is. You think you can just waltz in here and tear everything down? You think anyone will believe you over me?" "I think people are already starting to believe me," Maya replied, her voice unwavering. "The truth always comes out, Chief. It's only a matter of time before everyone knows who you really are." For a long, tense moment, they locked eyes. Maya knew that the confrontation was far from over. Chief Walker wouldn't go down without a fight, and she wasn't naive enough to think that exposing him would be easy. But in that moment, she felt a shift. Something inside her had clicked. This wasn't just about exposing one corrupt man. It was about showing the town that justice could still be served, even in the face of overwhelming power. Before Walker could respond, Rachel stepped forward, holding up a recorder. "I think this conversation has been documented," she said coolly. "The town deserves to know what you've been hiding." Maya's heart raced as she realized the magnitude of what they had just done. They had taken the first step toward exposing the truth, but it wasn't just about winning this battle. It was about breaking the cycle of silence and corruption that had plagued Ashford for so long. The next few days in Ashford were unlike anything the town had ever experienced. Word of the confrontation between Maya and Chief Walker spread quickly, fueled by whispers and hushed conversations. Maya's actions had sparked something in the town, a long-dormant hope that perhaps, just perhaps, things could change. But with that hope came resistance. Chief Walker used his influence to try to discredit Maya and Rachel, spreading lies about their motives and questioning their credibility. But the evidence was undeniable. The truth was out, and the people of Ashford could no longer ignore it. Maya's phone rang constantly, with calls from local journalists, police officers, and even old friends of her father who wanted to come forward with their own stories. Some were scared, afraid of what might happen if they spoke out, but others were ready to stand with Maya. The town was divided. Some wanted to protect the old order, while others were ready for change. Rachel worked tirelessly, writing articles and gathering even more information to support Maya's claims. They received help from lawyers who were willing to take on the case, determined to bring the corrupt officials to justice. As the legal proceedings began, Maya stood in the courtroom, her heart racing as the truth was laid bare for everyone to see. Chief Walker's lies began to unravel, one by one. The townspeople, who had once been afraid to question the authority of the police, began to speak out. The case against her father was reopened, and new evidence was brought to light. But the fight wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Maya knew there would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in years, she felt hopeful. Her father's innocence was no longer a distant dream. It was within reach. The day James Harris was released from prison, Ashford was a town divided. But it was also a town on the cusp of transformation. Maya stood outside the courthouse, her father's hand in hers, as the news cameras flashed. He was free, but his journey wasn't over. The scars from his wrongful imprisonment would never fully heal, but today, they were one step closer to justice. For Maya, it had been a long, difficult road. But as she looked at her father, finally reunited with her after all these years, she knew it had been worth it. They had fought for the truth, and they had won. The town would never be the same, but neither would they. As Maya and James walked together, side by side, towards their new future, there was a sense of peace in the air. The past would always be a part of them, but it no longer defined them. They were free. And in the quiet moments, as the sun set over Ashford, Maya knew that the fight for justice was never truly over. But for now, she could breathe. Her family had been restored, and the town's hidden secrets had finally been brought to light. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of truth and justice. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others. And be sure to check out the videos appearing on your screen for more gripping tales. Until next time, stay curious and keep believing in the power of the truth.